Hello, everyone. Today, we peel back the layers of a legend, not to admire its shimmer, but to expose its deadly, hollow core. We're talking about El Dorado, the fabled city of gold, a name that still conjures images of boundless wealth and daring adventure. But what if the greatest treasure hunt in history wasn't a triumph of exploration, but a tragic descent? What if El Dorado wasn't a city at all, but a mirage that swallowed tens of thousands, leaving behind only bones and shattered dreams? This is the story of an obsession so profound, so devastating, that it reshaped continents and claimed lives with a ferocity rarely seen. This is the hunt for El Dorado, a quest for a city that never existed, and the chilling answer to why so many died for it. It is a tale of greed, betrayal, paranoia, and the kind of existential despair that twists men into monsters. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to enter the heart of a golden nightmare. Now imagine a world aflame with rumor. It is the early 16th century. The Spanish conquistadors, having plundered the Aztec and Inca empires, are still ravenous. They've tasted gold, and it is a hunger. Cortés and Pizarro, names etched in history, had proven that vast, unimaginable riches lay hidden in this new world. But the well, it seemed, was beginning to run dry. Their lust for precious metals, however, was far from exhausted. No, it was only growing, mutating, becoming a collective madness, then a whisper, a tale spun by indigenous tribes, perhaps to appease the insatiable foreigners, perhaps to guide them away, or perhaps simply a misunderstanding born of cultural collision. But to the Spanish, it was the spark that ignited a new, furious blaze. The legend spoke of a chief, a king, not merely adorned with gold, but covered in it. Every morning his body would be anointed with aromatic resins, then dusted from head to toe with pure gold powder, transforming him into a living, breathing, glittering god. He would then board a raft laden with golden offerings and emeralds, paddle to the center of a sacred lake, and there, at the height of a solemn ritual, plunge into the shimmering waters, washing away his golden skin, casting priceless treasures into the depths as an offering to the gods. El Dorado, the golden one for the Muisca people of what is now Colombia, this was a sacred rite, a spiritual. For the Spanish, it was a direct invitation to paradise, a treasure beyond their wildest fantasies. They didn't hear the spiritual reverence. They heard only gold mountains of it, enough to buy empires, enough to erase all their debts, elevate their status, and grant them eternal glory. It was a vision that burned so brightly it blinded them to the reality of the unforgiving jungles and mountains. This wasn't just a legend, it was a prophecy of infinite wealth, meticulously placed by destiny for them to claim. The very air vibrated with anticipation, a fevered pitch of avarice. The first to hear, the first to truly grasp the potential of this golden whisper, were those closest to the established centers of power, Peru and Venezuela. From these nascent colonies, the initial thrusts into the unknown began, not as calculated expeditions, but as stampedes, a frantic race to claim the ultimate prize. The stakes were unimaginable. Failure meant destitution, humiliation, perhaps even death. Success meant legendary status, untold riches, and the favor of kings. The wilderness, however, was an impartial judge, and it cared little for European ambitions. In 1540, a name already synonymous with conquest, Gonzalo Pizarro, Francisco Pizarro's younger brother, heard the whispers with particular intensity. From Quito, in modern-day Ecuador, came tales of a land to the east, rich with cinnamon and, crucially, gold, always gold. He assembled an expedition, a formidable force of some 200 Spaniards and thousands of native porters and auxiliaries. Among his lieutenants was Francisco de Orellana, a man whose name would become intertwined with the greatest river on earth, albeit under the most harrowing circumstances. Their objective, not just El Dorado, but also the mythical land of cinnamon, a spice equally valuable to Europe. They plunged into the Andes, the jagged peaks and chilling winds a brutal welcome. Then the descent into the Amazon basin, a world utterly alien, a verdant hell where every step was a battle against nature itself. Torrential rains turned paths into quagmires, venomous snakes, giant insects, and unseen predators lurked in the suffocating humidity. Disease, a silent killer, began to decimate their ranks. Dysentery, fever, unknown ailments that withered men from the inside out, their horses, invaluable assets on the open plains, became liabilities in the dense jungle, often drowning in swollen rivers or succumbing to exhaustion. The land of cinnamon proved to be a lie, its trees not the prize they sought. Hunger became their constant companion. They ate their dogs, then their horses. Desperation set in, gnawing at their resolve. The dream of gold was slowly, inexorably, being replaced by the grim reality of survival as supplies dwindled and the prospect of turning back became a death sentence. Pizarro made a fateful decision. He ordered Orellana, with a small party and a hastily constructed brigantine, to sail down a mighty river they had discovered. The Napo to search for food and scout ahead. Orellana promised to return to bring back sustenance. But the river was swift, the current unforgiving. Returning upstream against its power was impossible. Or perhaps the lure of striking out on his own. Orellana, with his small band, continued downriver, abandoning Pizarro and the vast majority of the expedition to their agonizing fate. For Pizarro, it was an unforgivable act of betrayal. He and his remaining men, broken and emaciated, endured another year of unimaginable suffering before finally staggering back to Quito. Only a handful of Spaniards survived, a ghost company. Meanwhile, Orellana, unknowingly, became the first European to traverse the entire length of the Amazon River, a monumental feat of exploration born of desperation and desertion. He encountered fierce native tribes, some of whom were led by women warriors, giving rise to the legend of the Amazons. He found no gold, no El Dorado, only an endless river and an untamed wilderness. He reached the Atlantic, then sailed to Spain, a hero to some, a traitor to others. His journey, while incredible, only deepened the mystery of El Dorado, pushing its supposed location further into the impenetrable interior. His account, though, kept the fires of ambition burning, adding fuel to the myth. But the Amazon was not the only stage for this golden obsession. From the Caribbean coast, the legend of El Dorado wasn't static. It adapted, it migrated, it shifted with every new rumor. By the 1530s, the Muisca people's ritual at Lake Guatavita in present. De Colombia had become the primary focus. Here, the story went, was where the Golden One had offered his treasures. 3 separate heavily armed expeditions converged on this region, each vying for the glory. Alonso de Ojeda from Venezuela, Sebastián de Belloc Fezar from Peru, and perhaps most famously, Gonzalo Jim Fez de Quesada from Santa Marta on the Caribbean coast, a lawyer by trade but a ruthless conqueror by ambition. Quesada's journey began in 1536, a brutal march through coastal swamps and up into the steep, unforgiving Like Pizarro, his expedition was plagued by disease, hunger, and hostile tribes. His initial force of nearly 800 men dwindled rapidly. Rivers were crossed on hastily built rafts, mountains scaled with sheer willpower, and dense forests hacked through with machetes. It was a relentless, soul-crushing advance. Yet, unlike Pizarro, Quesada found something. Not El Dorado directly, but the rich Muisca civilization. He encountered their towns, their sophisticated social structures, and most importantly, their vast quantities of gold and emeralds. The Muisca, a highly advanced agricultural society, possessed an abundance of finely crafted gold ornaments and precious emeralds, used for religious rituals and trade. Quesada, through a combination of diplomatic maneuvering and brutal force, managed to subjugate the Muisca. He seized immense treasures, not in a single mythical city, but spread throughout their territory. For the Spanish, this was undeniable proof. El Dorado was real. It was here, in this fertile plateau, which Quesada named the Kingdom of New Granada. The Spanish conquistadors, in their relentless questioning of the Muisca, pressed for more. Was there an even grander city, an even richer king? The Muisca perhaps attempting to deflect attention, or perhaps genuinely believing in distant, wealthier neighbors, would point further into the jungle, towards yet another fabled land. The myth, like a cunning predator, shifted its lair, always just so. Quesada found immense wealth, but not the Facingle, concentrated fey source of the Golden One. The original ritual site, Lake Guatavita, was eventually located. The Spanish, in their typical fashion, attempted to drain it, believing the bottom would be paved with gold. They partially succeeded, recovering some artifacts, but the vast, unimaginable treasure remained elusive. The lake, it seemed, guarded its secrets well. The convergence of Quesada, Belaut Fezar, and Federman in the same Muisca territory, each seeking El Dorado independently, created a volatile situation. These three ambitious captains, at the head of their respective battle-hardened forces, came perilously close to open warfare over the spoils. Imagine the scene: three exhausted, brutalized armies, each having survived unimaginable hardships, now standing face to face in a land they believed was theirs by right of conquest, each convinced they were closer to the ultimate prize. Through tense negotiations and the looming threat of intervention from the Spanish crown, they ultimately avoided direct conflict, settling their claims through legal. But the underlying message was clear. El Dorado was not just a myth. It was a contested prize, a geopolitical flashpoint that could ignite wars. And the stakes, the perceived wealth, justified any risk, any hardship, any betrayal. The German chapter in the El Dorado saga is often overlooked, but no less tragic and brutal. In 1528, the powerful Welser banking family of Augsburg, Germany, secured a concession from Emperor Charles V, who was also King of Spain, to colonize and exploit Venezuela. They were granted rights in exchange for debt repayment, a purely mercantile venture driven by the allure of quick riches. They sent a series of governors, men like Ambrosius Ehinger and Nicolaus Federman, who were less administrators and more ruthless treasure hunters, driven by the same golden fever as their Spanish counterparts. Ehinger launched his first major expedition in 1529, deep into the interior of Venezuela, seeking an indigenous kingdom rumored to possess vast quantities of gold. His methods were extraordinarily cruel, even by conquistador standards. He chained his native porters, forced them to carry impossible loads, and executed them without hesitation if they faltered. He left a trail of death and devastation, not just from conflict, but from sheer neglect and brutality. The jungle, once again, proved an equal adversary. Ehinger himself was killed in 15th. His death, however, did little to deter the others. Federman, his successor, continued the brutal quest. His expedition, spanning from 1530 to 1539, was a relentless odyssey across Venezuela, and into the high plains of Colombia, ultimately leading him to the Muisca territory, where he famously encountered Quesada and Belaut Fezar. Federman's journey was characterized by immense. His men endured starvation, disease, and relentless attacks from indigenous tribes defending their lands. Like Ehinger, Federman showed little mercy, his vision clouded by the promise of gold. He too found emeralds and gold in the Muisca lands, but again, not the fabled city. He returned to Venezuela, his expedition a staggering testament to human endurance and insatiable greed, but ultimately a failure in its primary objective, to find El Dorado. These German expeditions underscored a grim truth. The hunt for El Dorado transcended nationality. Spanish, German, later English fey, the siren song of gold resonated across Europe, drawing adventurers and scoundrels. Each expedition, a fresh wave of hope, crashing against the unyielding rock of reality, leaving behind a new layer of bones in the soil. Yet, the myth, like a hydra, only grew stronger with each failed attempt. Why? Because the absence of proof only fueled speculation. If it wasn't here, it must be fair. Deeper, just over the next mountain range, around the next bend in the river. The myth became an excuse for conquest, a justification for brutality, a grand narrative to cloak the rawest forms of rapacious hunger. The stage was set for perhaps the most infamous figure in the El Dorado saga, a man whose name became synonymous with madness and unbridled savagery. Lope de Rare, the year is 1560. The Amazon, that green behemoth, once again becomes the stage for a quest that would devolve into a horrifying spectacle of paranoia, mutiny, and regicide. Don Pedro de Ursfea, a nobleman and governor, led an expedition of several hundred Spaniards down the Amazon from Peru, explicitly in search of El Dorado. Ursfea was a man of some refinement, but he had the fatal flaw of being too trusting, and perhaps not ruthless enough for the company he kept. Among his ranks was Lope de Aguirre, a Basque veteran, short in stature, but colossal in his capacity for cruelty and rebellion. Aguirre was a man who had seen too much, suffered too much, and harbored a festering resentment against authority, against the crown. He was a master of manipulation, a charismatic figure to the disillusioned, and a terrifying force of nature to anyone who crossed him. The expedition quickly faltered. The usual litany of jungle horrors, disease, starvation, constant indigenous resistance. Ursfea, increasingly dispirited, became indecisive, prone to fits of despair. This was all. He began to sow dissent, whispering poison into the ears of the frustrated soldiers, playing on their fears and their greed. He promised them a new kingdom, one where they would be masters, free from the distant Spanish crown. In a chilling act of betrayal, Aguirre orchestrated Ursfea's murder. Ursfea was stabbed in his hammock, his last moments spent in bewildered agony. Aguirre then installed a puppet leader, Fernando de Gozumfen, a young nobleman, as the expedition's new prince of the new empire he envisioned. But Aguirre's ambition knew no bounds, and his paranoia was a bottomless well. He began to systematically eliminate anyone he deemed a threat, anyone who questioned his authority, anyone who looked at him askance. He murdered priests, officers, and even his own puppet prince, Gozumfen, along with 30 others, in a terrifying purge. He declared himself the wrath of God, the Prince of Freedom, and swore allegiance to no king but himself. He renounced his Spanish citizenship, declaring war on Philip II. His ambition mutated from finding El Dorado to carving out his own empire, a kingdom built. The expedition became a floating asylum, a nightmare journey down the Amazon and out into the Atlantic, then north along the coast, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. Aguirre, consumed by his delusions, even murdered his own daughter, Elvira, believing she would be dishonored if she fell into the hands of his pursuers. He feared her death less than her future. This act of paternicide marked the remaining members of his company, terrified by his escalating madness, finally turned on him. Aguirre was captured and executed by firing squad. His last words, a mixture of defiance and despair, were lost to the wind. Lope de Aguirre's journey was perhaps the most vivid illustration of the El Dorado myth's dark power. It didn't just lead men to their deaths. It stripped them of their humanity. The promise of gold had become a catalyst for the deepest evils lurking within the human heart. His story is not just a footnote in history. It is a terrifying cautionary tale of how absolute power, absolute greed, and absolute delusion can intertwine to create a hell on earth. If you find yourself captivated by these dark historical tales, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. The El Dorado myth wasn't exclusively a Spanish obsession. By the late 16th century, England, a burgeoning maritime power, began to cast its ambitious gaze on the New World, and one of its most brilliant, enigmatic, and ultimately tragic figures, Sir Walter Raleigh, became irrevocably entangled in the Golden Dream. Raleigh was a man of letters, a poet, a courtier, a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, but he was also a shrewd adventurer and a dreamer of empires. He devoured the Spanish accounts of El Dorado, particularly those of Orellana and the rumored city of Manoa, in Guyana, modern-day Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana, and parts of Brazil. Unlike the raw, unlettered conquistadors, Raleigh approached the myth with a blend of intellectual curiosity and strategic calculation. He believed that if England could find and control El Dorado, it could break Spain's dominance in the Americas and secure unimaginable wealth for the crown. It was a geopolitical maneuver disguised as a treasure hunt. In 1595, Raleigh launched his first major expedition to Guyana. His approach was notably different from the Spanish. He attempted to cultivate alliances with indigenous tribes, seeking information and cooperation rather than outright conquest. He journeyed up the Orinoco River, marveling at the vastness of the land and the diversity of its peoples. He found no city of gold, but he did find tantalizing. He heard stories of a great inland empire, rich beyond measure, ruled by a powerful king, Fay the legendary Manoa. Raleigh returned to England with an epic, richly detailed, and ultimately embellished account of his journey.